This is the last panel of our Spring 2024 conference. I'm Lauren, the co-director, the conference director of Yale UNICEF.
I'm Angie. I am one of the co-presidents of Yale UNICEF.
And we're going to be moderating panel 3 today. So we have an amazing speaker with us named Kim Miller, who is a part of Blue Dragon Children's Foundation in Vietnam, working to help with humanitarian causes and also anti-human trafficking. And so we're so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Of course.
Okay. So yeah, we'd love to ask you a few questions about your experience working with Blue Dragon Children's Foundation and the work you've done in like social work, educational work, and advocacy. And I guess we'd want to start off with like what got you started into this work? How did you end up in this line of work? What motivated you to go into children's rights?
Yeah, before I started working for Blue Dragon, I was a high school teacher. And so I'd always had an interest I was never somebody who really cared a lot about teaching a particular subject. So I was an English and a drama teacher, but I was more interested in student well-being and looking at the a bit more holistically, rather than having a real passion for any particular subject. And so that's where my teaching was sort of situated. And then in 2011, I was teaching in a high school, and Michael Brzezowski, the founder of Blue Dragon, came to speak at the high school that I was working at with a young man called V. And V, at that stage, he had been one of the very first street kids that Blue Dragon had ever met. So at that time, Blue Dragon was working with children who were homeless, and who were working on the streets. That was one of the first boys that Michael met back then. And when he came to speak at my school, V was no longer a child. He was a young man who was working for Blue Dragon as an outreach worker. So his job was to go out onto the streets at night and to meet children who had been like he was when he first met Blue Dragon. And he shared his story with the students, and I don't really know what impact it had on the students that day, but it had an enormous impact on me. And so I ended up going across to Blue Dragon, across to Vietnam from Australia. I did a couple of weeks of research for Blue Dragon, doing some volunteer work with them. And over that time, I met some children who, I think, I'm actually a little bit embarrassed to say it, but before I went to Blue Dragon, I think I thought that I would see, angry, dirty, smelly, naughty, violent kids. And really, these children were just like the kids I was teaching. They just hadn't had the same love or the same opportunity and the same chances that the students that I'd been teaching had had. But there was one boy who he kind of fit some of my expectations. He wanted to keep people at a distance. He wasn't really talking to anybody. He'd only been at Blue Dragon for a little while. And he kept a book in front of his face for most of the time that he was there. And that book was written in English, and sometimes it was upside down. He definitely wasn't reading that book. He was just using it to keep the world out. But over my time at Blue Dragon, in just a few weeks, I saw him start to come to life. I saw him start to develop a connection with V, the social worker at that stage, and with Michael, the founder of Blue Dragon, and Michael at that point was the CEO. And I saw him start to develop that connection with his social workers and with some of the other kids. But I'd never seen him smile. I'd never seen him laugh. And he didn't ever initiate interactions. He'd just kind of respond to them. On my final day, we were riding bicycles across Long Bien Bridge, one of the very famous bridge in Hanoi in Vietnam. And I hadn't been on a bicycle in like 20 years. And I definitely never ridden a bicycle in Vietnamese traffic. And so I was kind of a bit giggly and scared and nervous. And I looked across, and this boy was on the back of V's bike, and he had the biggest smile on his face. Like he was just laughing at me and with me. And I took a photo of that moment. I still have that photo. And in that moment, I knew that he was going to be okay. He'd had some terrible things happen. He'd been trafficked for sexual abuse. He'd been homeless. He'd had terrible things happen in his home life before he became homeless. But in that moment, I knew that with love and care and support, he was actually going to be okay. And so when I was talking to Michael about what I was going to do with my life and where I wanted to work, and he asked me about an email address for something, and how long would I stay at the school I was teaching at, and I said just until you've got a full-time job for me at Blue Dragon.
Oh,
And that was nearly 10 years ago. That was July. Oh,
wow.
sorry, that was actually in 2012. But I've been working full-time for Blue Dragon since July 2020. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. It is 5 a.m. for me, and
No worries
I've been
at
working.
all. Yeah.
I've been working with them since July 2014, so it's been nearly
Wow.
a decade. Yeah.
That's amazing. Actually, I'm very curious about what exactly social workers do at Blue Dragon because they seem to cover so much. Like you mentioned that there's outreach who have to go and connect the organization with children to begin with, and then there's people who like probably provide like therapy work for people who've experienced trauma. So I'm just interested in what exactly the nature of your work entails.
Yeah, so we have a name for it. We actually call it the whole stream approach. So we work with people before they're trafficked, when they're homeless, when they're needing support, education, food. We also do rescues of human trafficking, and we also help survivors of human trafficking to be able to rebuild their lives, to have livelihood support, to go back to education, and to heal from trauma. So we're working with people every step of the journey that they're needing support. So we have a team of social workers, we have psychologists, we have lawyers, accountants. We have everything that's needed, cooks for people who need to heal from trauma or to help protect them from being trafficked. And so we have a team of social workers who are out on the streets to meet young people who are homeless and to be able to help them before they're trafficked, before something worse than being homeless happens to them. We have a team of social workers who do daily case management of young people who are living in poverty in the areas that we're working in. We have some social workers who do like early warning interventions. So they're looking for people who might be vulnerable to being trafficked or to situations of slavery and abuse. And then we also have social workers who are able to work and psychologists who are able to work with people who have been impacted by trauma and to help them to see the other side of that. So yeah, we're not an easy organization to describe in one sentence sometimes because we do so much, so many different aspects of social work.
That's so cool.
Thank you for sharing. And I guess only a slight pivot, we'd also love to hear a bit more about the educational work that you've done, since especially you started as a teacher, and I know Blue Dragon Children's Foundation has a lot of educational outreach as well. So would you be willing to share some of that?
Yeah, so my role is a little bit different. So at Blue Dragon, I'm the schools and partnerships coordinator. So I work with schools all around the world. I work with students from international schools and schools both within and outside of Vietnam. And I'm working with students and schools who want to learn about human trafficking, modern slavery, environmental injustice, homelessness, poverty, that cycle of poverty. And so a lot of my work is outreach work in terms of helping people around the world understand the issues that impact the children at Blue Dragon and all over Vietnam, as well as what they can do to help. And so one part of that role is also working with the children at Blue Dragon. So we have a lot of people, a lot of students in schools who engage with us through the year, and some of them want to come to Vietnam to visit as well. And so what we need is a way that, it can be dangerous for vulnerable children to have strangers coming in, meeting them, visiting, wanting to know their stories, wanting to play with them, and then leaving again. And so, one of the things that we do is we find a way that we can provide a really authentic educational experience for international students or for students visiting Blue Dragon, but that we can also keep the Blue Dragon kids safe. And so part of my role is helping to design those programs. And so we do things like when people come to Blue Dragon, they don't tend to see the children there as victims or as children living in poverty. Instead, they see them as people who are competing with them against in a game of soccer or football, on the same team as a game of football. Our kids run hip hop workshops. And so, because one of the big things, as part of our youth engagement program, is a hip hop program where the kids come and they love it. They come a couple of nights a week and they learn to dance and they're building up their confidence and their skills. And then when we have visitors come, they can then run a hip hop workshop for those visitors as part of the program. Sometimes we do collaborative projects that are photography based, but we're finding ways to be able to interact that's safe for our children. And we're only inviting the kids at Blue Dragon who want to come along to that, because we need to make sure that we're keeping them safe, that we're maintaining their dignity, and that when we have visitors come to Blue Dragon, we're doing something that's actually aiding them in their development, rather than taking steps backwards in their healing. So yeah, so that's part of my role there. We have other teachers at Blue Dragon whose role is to help children go back to school and to succeed at school. So often, if a child's been homeless or if they've been living in absolute poverty, maybe they've missed a lot of education. They haven't had a chance to go to school, or they've had a lot of time out of the classroom. And so going back to school can be really difficult for them. And so we try to find a way to be able to give them the skills they need to go back to school. And we run like tutoring and after school workshops for them to be able to get up to speed so that they can succeed at school. We know that getting children into education is one of the most important things we can do. When we meet people, the first thing that we want to be able to do is to get them back home to their families. For most people, the best thing that can happen for them is to be in a safe, loving, caring environment with family. And so getting them home to their family is super important. And the second thing is getting them back into education and training.
That sounds so wholesome, and it feels like you really put a lot of thought into how to approach like children specifically with their psyche. I'm wondering, what kinds of organizations do you need to work with to combat like children being out in the streets or being trafficked? As in, like, what organizations help you versus what organizations do you need to fight against in the community?
Yeah, we're definitely not very popular with pedophiles and crime gangs. They would be our biggest challenges in the community. Keeping the children safe from people who want to do them harm, human traffickers, who are looking for vulnerable children to traffic and to exploit, are our I think we're not very popular in those communities. But we work with, even on the ground, like in Hanoi, in the cities in Hanoi in Vietnam, our outreach workers, when they go out onto the street, and they're working right through the night to meet children, because that's the easiest place to notice homeless children is if they're sleeping somewhere in the middle of the night when clearly they should be home somewhere safe with a family, right? So that's the easiest time to find them when they're not just blending in. We will often have community members who know our Blue Dragon staff, and who'll say to them, "Hey, there's a new child sleeping over there," and that's part of our outreach program, is working with the community who get to know us and to know our work and who support that as well.
Mm.
Part of our work is also in ending human trafficking. We don't just do the rescues. We want to be able to stop children from being vulnerable to being trafficked in the first place.
Mhm.
And so we're starting up, we call them anti-trafficking boards. It's basically community groups. So it's people in communities who are, maybe they're teachers, maybe they're government officials, they might be police, they might be elders within the community, very well respected people in those communities. And we train them to be able to understand what are the risk factors for somebody being trafficked, what makes somebody vulnerable to being trafficked, how can they find out if somebody is in danger of being trafficked, how can they share some of the warning signs of how a trafficker might behave, some of the red flags, what they can do to keep people safe. And those anti-trafficking boards run a series of workshops within the community, helping people to be safe and also helping us to know who's vulnerable so that we can support them. We couldn't do our work without those anti-trafficking boards, without those community groups. because we know that to be able to end human trafficking in Vietnam, we need to be working from the very southernmost tip right up to northern Vietnam. We need to be everywhere. And of course, we don't have enough staff to be able to do that. And so we need the community and those community groups to be on board, to be able to partner with us to make that happen.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, thank you for really explaining to us in depth how these efforts are so collaborative and multidimensional within these communities. And with that being said, what do you think is needed for improvement? Like, what else do you think is needed, be it from a government standpoint, a funding standpoint, internal, external? Take the question as you wish. What do you think is needed or important for helping stop child trafficking?
Yeah, there are so many different components to that. Right now, human trafficking is the worst that we have ever seen it out of Vietnam and in Southeast Asia. To give you an idea, at this point of the year, we have already done 7 times the number of rescues that we anticipated we would do in a 12-month period of time. When we set the annual budgets, we planned for a certain number of rescues based on the numbers over the last couple of years and what we saw, what we projected was happening in Southeast Asia. What's happened is that there are new forms of trafficking that are evolving. So post-COVID, we saw the emergence of online scams compounds. So people from across Southeast Asia are being trafficked. It started being into Cambodia, where they're being forced to do online and telephone scams. So I don't know how many scam text messages or emails or messages you guys are getting, but I know for me, I'm getting a couple a day, and it's everywhere. And a lot of those people who are doing those scams have been trafficked and are being forced to do them. They're being held under armed guards. If they're not reaching their targets or if they're refusing to work, they are tortured. We know of people who have had organs removed as punishment for not meeting their targets. And it ran rife in Cambodia to start with, and it wasn't stopped quickly enough. And so now we're also doing those rescues from Myanmar, Laos, Thailand. We've heard of people from the Philippines, and we've even heard of this happening as far as the Middle East now. And so these forms of trafficking are absolutely brutal. When we first started doing rescues of human trafficking, it tended to be of girls who were trafficked into either forced sex trade or into forced marriages. And that is changing a lot at the moment. And so being able to stay on top of those changes is incredibly difficult. But not only that, so many of the rescues that we're doing at the moment are of young people who've been trafficked into Myanmar, which is actually in the middle of a civil war right now. And so we're attempting to do rescues of people who have been trafficked into a war zone. So not only do they have the trauma of having been tricked and trafficked, because that's how most people are trafficked, by somebody lying to them or tricking them, they also have the trauma of the abuse that they've had at the hands of the traffickers. And then they're also in an active war zone. We're finding that one of the most safest ways to get people home is walking them home from Myanmar through the night, walking through the night, hiding through the day. Our first rescue like that took 48 days. And so it's, we know there are thousands of people needing that sort of support right now. So that's definitely one of the challenges. We're needing the funding to do that, having the funding to be able to run the anti-trafficking programs, and being able to always stay one step ahead of the traffickers. The good thing about that is what we found is that the causes of people being trafficked, the things that make them vulnerable, and the reasons why people are trafficked, they tend to stay the same no matter what the form of trafficking is. And so we know that for our anti-trafficking programs, they're working. We can see them working in community. In the communities where we're implementing them, people are being safe from trafficking. And so the good thing about, it's the hardest thing is that it's always changing, but it's also one of the things that gives us a great deal of hope is that we know that our anti-trafficking strategies are working. And no matter what tricks the traffickers use, the ways that we can keep people safe are very similar.
Um, could you actually teach us a bit about what those anti-trafficking services are, especially for children? Because I can only imagine that it's even harder for children because they have less experience with the real world and they have less autonomy, just like in society. So could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, and I think one of the big dangers is that so many of the people who are being trafficked in Vietnam, it's happening through social media and it's happening online. And of course, young people are absolutely immersed in that world. And so it's finding ways to be able to help them think critically when they're given offers and opportunities. In rural Vietnam, in the villages, children often don't go to school past grade 5. They might end with a grade 5 level education, and post that, they're working. They're looking for work, or they're supporting their families because their families can't afford to send them to school. Or maybe their schools are a long way away, and it's, for girls, if their schools don't have bathrooms, if there's rain or a landslide and they can't walk to school, they can't get there, then they're not going to school, which is making them particularly vulnerable to trafficking. And so, one of the things that we do, we have these anti-trafficking boards that work with primarily, from teenagers and parents and adult community members who are often caring for children, obviously. So we're helping children in that way. But we also run these workshops with students. So we have student leadership groups where students from different schools in the community will come together, and they will be part of these anti-trafficking workshops as well. And then they take the information that they learn there and they take it back to their own school communities. And so that's one of the things that we're doing with these student leadership groups. Also, by running workshops, by finding out what is it that the children in a particular community enjoy doing. In Hanoi, it has been skateboarding, it's been hip hop, it's been robotics workshops, it's been barista workshops. In rural areas, it's different. Sometimes it's learning English. Sometimes it's hygiene and learning skincare and beauty care. So there are different things that appeal to different groups of students. By running those workshops, it gives us an opportunity to be able to do more subtle anti-trafficking work, to be able to help the students feel connected, to have something interesting that they want to be part of, to give them a reason to want to stay in school. If they're going to school each day and they're excited to see their friends because they want to be part of this English workshop or they want to be part of the soccer club, then they have a reason to want to go to school that's not just sitting at a desk and learning, which, for most students doesn't seem like the most fun way they can spend their day. So it's implementing things like that as well.
Mm.
Some of the other important things that we're doing is providing livelihood support for families. So by buying families a pregnant cow or a pregnant pig, we're able to help them to have a sustainable income, which means that sending their children to school isn't a financial burden. We can pay for school fees. We often pay for school fees in community. We're helping parents with livelihood support. So it's doing things to ease the financial burdens from families so that they can send their children to school rather than having them at home to work.
Mm. It really is impressive and incredible, all the work that you guys do on the ground. So I guess continuing on that theme, could you expand a little bit more on what rescuing children from child trafficking looks like? Like, how is that done? What's the process? I know you mentioned it a little bit, but could you maybe expand a little bit more?
Yeah, and it's different in every circumstance. I obviously can't give too much away,
Yes.
especially knowing this is recorded and going online. We have to be a little bit careful of what we say about our rescue methods to keep both our staff and also the victims of human trafficking safe.
Of course.
But what I can tell you is that it's often sometimes it's like a detective movie. There can be, we don't always know exactly where somebody is. If, for example, a child has been trafficked into another country where they don't speak the language, they might not know exactly where they are. And so we need to be able to help them find ways to know where they are and to let us know where they are. Our our guy who does most of the planning and the strategy around our rescues, he sleeps on his back with his phone on vibrate on his chest, because most of the calls that will come through for people asking for help come through in the middle of the night. And by keeping his phone on vibrate on his chest, it doesn't wake his wife when those calls come in. And so sometimes rescues are about being available. It's about being able to answer those calls. Those phone calls can be life and death. If we miss a call, it could be a life and death call that we've missed. And so it's being available. It's being able to, we don't go in, you know, with weapons and guns blazing and aggressive, and we try to do things as quietly and as carefully as we can. Our best case scenario is that we're able to do a rescue and nobody knows that the young person that we've rescued is missing for a number of hours, because that gives us time to be able to get them further away and further to safety. And so our rescues are always done in a way that's as safe as they possibly can be. When we first started rescuing victims of human trafficking, we were rescuing children out of garment factories, out of sweatshops in Vietnam. And we would often take the police with us on those rescues. And partly that was so that the police and the government understood the situation that these children were in. By taking the police and government with us, both to the rescues and into community when we took the children home, they were able to understand at a really deep level what the problem was. It wasn't just that children were choosing to help their families or that parents were sending their children to work, but that these children had been tricked, they'd been lied to, they'd been offered, for example, scholarships, but finding themselves instead locked into garment factories where they were working 16 to 18 hours a day, no pay, no education. And so we were able then to take the police with us. As a result of that, we were able to get the child labour laws in Vietnam changed, which has kept children safe from garment factories and from slavery-like conditions within Vietnam. So yeah, every rescue is different. It depends where it is and what it is as to what that actually looks like.
Are you able to work with the government like more closely to get help to rescue children from these situations or no?
Yeah, and we particularly work really closely with the border guards. So the border guards and local government are, it's very much a sense of nationalistic pride to be able to rescue victims of human trafficking and to keep, excuse me,
No
to
worries.
keep Vietnamese people safe and to help them return home. So yeah, there's definitely a component where we're working with the government to be able to make that come true and to make those both the anti-trafficking work as well as our rescues be successful. So yeah, it's definitely a really important component of our work, and the Vietnamese government is really on board with that. You know, they are doing everything they can as well to be able to stop Vietnamese people from being trafficked and to help them to be able to come home.
So we left off with you talking about how you were able to collaborate with like the government and the border guards. Um, Now, is there anything that is like hard or challenging when you work with the government, especially because I know that certain things like when you work with the government, it can be politicized, and I know that that could be an unsavory situation to work with, especially regarding like children's rights, where I don't think it should be like at the level of politics. Um, so yeah.
We're finding the Vietnamese government are definitely on board with our work. We've been part of having several laws in Vietnam changed. So, and I know you're seeing somebody with an Australian accent and an Australian face in front of you, but we have about 130 staff at Blue Dragon, and only 5 of us are foreigners. And so our staff are primarily Vietnamese, which I think also goes a long way towards people understanding the culture and understanding the way that things work in Vietnam. We're not trying to impose necessarily a Western lens on the work that we're doing then. Our work with police and with government in having laws changed has been really collaborative. So until 2016, the laws around sexual abuse in Vietnam protected girls in a way that boys were not protected. And so boys were more vulnerable to being exploited with sexual abuse, with their abusers not able to be prosecuted to the full extent, simply because of the definitions within the law. And so we worked over a number of years with the police and with the government to create changes to get that law changed. And it was changed in 2016 and ratified in 2018. After that work, the government then came to us, the police came to us, and we were able to support them to be able to create changes to the way that young people and children are dealt with by the law. Because until then, the way that children and adults were dealt with by the law and by the police, the guidelines around how that was all working, there weren't differences between how children were supported compared to how adults were supported. And so we were able to work with the government to create those changes. So you can see, like, every step of the way, we're collaborating and we're seeing really hopeful and positive aspects. I think it's one of the most common questions that we're asked. And I think people often expect that we will find that working with the government is challenging in Vietnam, but we are actually finding them to be very proactive. We've worked in Vietnam for 20 years now. It's our 20th birthday this year, our 20th anniversary. And we've had a lot of success and a lot of progress over that time, and seeing the Vietnamese government really caring about its citizens and its children.
Wait, that's really encouraging to hear. Yeah.
Actually, speaking on the legalities and the legislative side of it all, how would you describe Blue Dragon's role in enacting and changing legislation? What role would you say they play in trying to advocate for more like legal and written protection for children's rights?
Yes, it's a really collaborative approach. So we're able to use our experience and our case studies and our experience over 20 years to be able to help guide those sort of decisions. So yeah, it's a very collaborative approach.
That's really cool. So at the end of like everything, do you find it like what is the most effective way that other people can help with like the issue of children's rights in Vietnam and organizations such as Blue Dragon? Is it like raising awareness about the cause? Is it donating? Is it getting involved directly? We just want to know so that we can help expand your reach and like get others involved as much as possible in your mission.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, look, I think we have a really important part to play globally. We have a really strong voice, and partly how we vote is part of that. It's looking at what are, for example, the migration laws in a given country. What are the laws around in your own countries? What are the laws around who can come to your country and who can't, and have difficulties for them to be there, which makes it more easily for somebody to be exploited if they're looking to have a better life. It's being able to look at what is your country doing to be able to support victims of human trafficking and rescues, and using your voice to be able to show that you care about these issues. If our lawmakers and our law enforcers don't understand that we care, they will continue to work on the sort of issues that we do care about and that we have a voice in showing that we care about, because that's what will get them re-elected. And so it's making sure that people understand that we care about these issues. We want our law enforcement and our lawmakers around the world globally to be thinking about human trafficking. We need people in big business, in banks, and in the IT sector. When we're looking at these scam centers, these online scam centers that are primarily financially and greed driven, there are people in business who are able to, in banks and in IT, who are able to develop the software and the technology to be able to end this. We need people to be vigilant and to be able to use their careers and their profession to be able to create changes globally.
I see.
By donating to Blue Dragon or other organizations like us that are helping to lift vulnerable people out of poverty, you're able to help people be less at risk of being trafficked. People globally who are living in poverty are wanting and needing to create a better life for themselves so they can afford to feed their families, so they can afford to have housing, so they can afford to send their children to school, so that children can continue to go to school. Helping people to be able to be aware of the tricks of human traffickers is one component of ending human trafficking. But it needs to come together with lifting people out of poverty. It needs to come together with education. It needs to come together with doing the rescues and creating legal changes. And so looking at what you can do in your own communities or in supporting organizations like Blue Dragon to be able to help lift people out of poverty helps make them less vulnerable to being trafficked. Having these conversations is incredibly important. You know, having people being aware of the issues and understanding what's happening is one of the ways to create global change, which is really what's needed here. This isn't just a problem in Vietnam, it's a problem all around the world, as I'm sure you're aware. And so it's something that, yeah, having those conversations, funding, hugely important. People often say to me, they want to come to Vietnam because they want to do more, they want to be directly involved. And I've had somebody say to me once, I don't want to just donate money because it's too easy. And when you dial back from that, if somebody is donating, if a student in the US is donating $20 to Blue Dragon or to another charity needing your support, what that means is that you went to work for an hour, not to feed yourself, not to go to the movies, not to pay your rent, not to pay your electricity bills, but to help somebody in another country who you've never even met. What's more incredible than that? And so that's one of the things that we sort of tell people to use what's in your hand, use what you have. Is what you have a job where you're a lawyer in your own country and you're helping people in your own country, but you have an income where you can send money to another country to help somebody else? That's amazing. If you're a lawyer in Vietnam who speaks Vietnamese, come and talk to us. You know, there are ways that people can help in their own community. So we always say, look for what you have. What are your passions? What are your skills? What do you love to do? What are you good at? And look for who needs that. Who needs that locally? Who needs that internationally? And find a way to use that to create positive change.
I see. That was so amazing. And thank you so much for such an enlightening discussion. Those were all of the questions that we had prepared for you for the panel, but now we're going to open up to the floor to see if there's any open mic questions from the audience.
Sure.
Okay. Oh.
No, thank you very much. It's wonderful the work that you're doing. I'm not sure if you can hear me at all, but I guess I'm really impressed with the work that you've been doing. And I guess one of the questions I had for individuals who actually have been trafficked, are there any opportunities that people have developed for them to actually come together and reflect on the experience that they've had and to be sort of teachers for the future in terms of, you know, what experiences they've gone through and really bring people together to in some way be supportive of you know, the realities that they've been through and to really try and have a positive impact in terms of moving forward.
Were you able to get the question?
Yeah, so let me just to repeat it, just to make sure. So what I heard is there a way for survivors of human trafficking to be able to get together and support each other? Is that the question?
Yes, and also like to be able to teach others of their like experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have it's like a peer. So we have a team of psychologists who work at Blue Dragon, and we use a variety of different methods of therapy, depending on what it is that an individual needs. So we don't have a one fits all model. We use the therapies and the interventions that individuals need. One of the items in our toolkit that we offer is that peer mediation, that peer intervention. And because you're right, we do find that often it's only somebody else who's been trafficked who can truly understand what somebody's been through, and be able to have those conversations with them in a way that has a deep understanding and a deep empathy. And so we definitely do use those workshops and opportunities for people to come together to support each other. We are very careful it's a very individualized approach. So some people, some survivors, we might bring them back to Vietnam, and we might get to 10 kilometers out of their village and they say, leave me here. I've got a story. I know what I want to tell my community that has happened to me. I don't ever want to think or talk about this again. I don't want you to ever contact me again. And they want to get on with their lives in a way that doesn't include Blue Dragon, or that doesn't include ongoing support or ongoing connection with other survivors. So of course they have our details. If that ever changes at any time, they can come back at any moment. But we're really respectful of people's right to dignity and their right to choice. And so not everybody wants to be involved in that. We as an organization want to protect the dignity and the privacy of our survivors. So if there was somebody who wanted to talk about the story or to share their story, we would be able to share that story in a way that protects them. Giving informed consent when you're a survivor of human trafficking in Vietnam is incredibly difficult, because even if they say, yes, I want to share my story, I want to help other people, we have rescued them. We may have gone into another country to help them come home. We may have provided them with food, clothing, financial support, education, helped them get back into vocational training, supported them with psychology, with legal support, with getting the health support that they needed. And so we want to make sure that people truly understand that they don't owe Blue Dragon or anybody else anything for that. And so getting conformed consent and making sure that people are really free to say no is really difficult. And so we don't ask. It's one of the things that we don't ask that of our survivors. We have survivors who have become psychologists, who've gone on to do social work, and who have chosen to come back in a professional way to be able to provide support for other survivors of human trafficking and other victims of abuse. But they're doing it from an educated and professional sense, rather than out of a sense of duty or obligation. So yeah, it's something that we want to support if it's something that the individual wants, but it's also something that we're super careful and super cautious about.
I see. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, you can come out.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Amadi. I guess my question was more like, I was wondering if there is like a force or like a team in Blue Dragon Children's Foundation that kind of assists with like, I guess helping to like fix like maybe Vietnam's like legal framework when it comes to like criminalizing like child traffickers, because I do know that like, for example, with the 2011 law on like human trafficking prevention and combat in Vietnam, just the word like victim is pretty inconsistent, so it's like hard for responsible authorities to actually like handle like these kind of trafficking cases. So I was wondering if that's like something you guys also do in your mission, or if that's something you'd like to like undertake. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we do. We have lawyers on our team who both represent victims of human trafficking and who are part of those law reform cases. We also have a monitoring, evaluation, and learning team who we compile our research data reports based on the data of the rescues that we've done, the court cases that we've been part of, and what's happening in Vietnam, and the data of what's happening in Vietnam at the moment. And so we're able to use those to help guide processes for creating legal change. And so that's one of the things that when we first started doing the rescues of children in garment factories, for example, we were very new to human trafficking, anti-human trafficking work. And so we weren't necessarily collecting the data that was needed to be able to help create those changes. Now we know that's exactly what we need. We believe there's probably a global role that we can play in that all around the world there will be differences in how rescues need to happen, in how we can keep people safe from human trafficking. But we think there's probably some underlying principles that remain the same. And so that's part of our mission at the moment, is to end human trafficking and to be able to work out what are the things that we're doing that can be done elsewhere. And so, yeah, keeping that data and that research is a really important component of being able to create that change and to create legal frameworks that are fair and effective.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no more questions from the audience, we want to wrap this up by thanking you once again for your time and for your experience, for your narrative, and for everything. Thank you so much for coming. This was an amazing panel.
And thank you so
You're
much.
so welcome.
Yeah.
Look, I really appreciate the fact that you guys are taking time out of your day to care about children in Vietnam, and that you're working towards protecting children globally. I don't know that at your age it was something that I had really paid a lot of attention to, or that I was really open to. It came later for me. So I'm really in awe of the work that you're doing. I really appreciate you doing it. So thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.